Chapter 6. Experiences on Picket Duty. The city of Monclova in the state of Coahuila was built in the year 1687 as a stronghold against the French who threatened the Spanish possession from Louisiana. It was formerly the capital of the state and contains about 4,000 inhabitants who I judge obtain a precarious living by murder and robbery. The women appeared to all be of the most common character, and the men regular assassins. When not on duty, I went into town day and night, armed with a bowie knife and the chamber of my hall's carbine, visited the fandangos and gambling rooms, danced, gambled, drank wine and mescal, made love to the senoritas, and with many a gold onza in my pockets, staggered into camp at Reveille, all safe, while many a poor fellow's body would be found horribly mutilated, stripped and thrown into a ditch to be devoured by coyotes and buzzards. The disgraceful armistice granted by General Taylor proved a severe blow to Wool's division. With inadequate rations, we were to remain here over 3 weeks, surrounded by a hostile population and the most demoralizing influences. The volunteers growled, and finally 2 Illinois regiments broke out in open mutiny and started on their way back to the Rio Grande. The regulars, by order of General Wool, promptly suppressed this, and they confined themselves to muttered threats. At this time, the guard duty at camp was done in a very negligent and reprehensible manner. I often saw 2 sentinels meet at the ends of their post, stick their muskets in the ground by the bayonets, set themselves, and indulge in a game of old sledge, or euchre. Others, with a dusky senorita for a companion, would leave their post and retire to some inviting shade, and in love dalliance contrive to pass their 2 hours quite pleasantly. And this in a country filled with prowling bands of guerrillas who recognized no treaties or laws. When I first enlisted, I resolved to discharge all duty prompt and faithful, and when off duty, I considered I had a right to enjoy myself as I deemed proper. One day, when I was on General Wool's guard, he, with his staff, rode into town to dine. As we approached the guard line, a sucker on post was seated on the ground with a roguish-looking senorita engaged in eating frijoles and pan de maize. The sentinel coolly eyed the cavalcade, and with no thoughts of rising to salute, he remarked, "Good day, General. Hot riding out, I reckon?" The general thundered out, "Call the officer of the guard." The man just raised himself on his elbow and drawled out, "Lieutenant Woodson, come here right quick, post 9, for the old general wants you." He then turned to his companion with a self-satisfied air, as if he had discharged his duty in the most exemplary manner. The officer of the guard made his appearance without belt or sword, coat unbuttoned, and a straw hat on. The general gave him a severe reprimand for his own appearance, as well as the unsoldier-like conduct of the guard, whereupon the officer broke out, "Jake Strout, you ain't worth shucks! If you don't get right up and salute the general, I'll drive your gal away, doggone if I don't!" The gallant sentinel riled up at this and replied that if the general wanted saluting, the lieutenant might do it, but he wasn't a-going to do anything of the kind. General Wool cut them short by telling the officer to follow him down the main entrance, where the 6 U.S. infantry were on guard. "Come," he said, "and I will show you how guard duty should be done." The first boy in blue we came to was a 6-foot Irishman, who was bent in the most extraordinary manner near double. What's the matter, my man?" cried the general, as the Mick faced to the front and presented without straightening in the least. He replied, "The general will excuse me, but ever since I have ate corn, I have been troubled with a goneness and bastily appetite. And faith, I believe I am turning into a horse, and I will be on all 4s before long." The general, without waiting to hear more, dashed off for town. Picket guard duty with scouting and foraging kept the dragoons pretty well employed. This suited me, anything but lying in camp, which was hot, dusky, and without shade. Our details for pickets, which were for 24 hours, were mounted with 1 day's rations for man and horse. One favorite post with me was a place about 9 miles from Monclova on the Paris Road. Here on the mesa, or tableland, well shaded with mesquite trees, we formed our reserves, and with 1 vedette thrown out, we would unsaddle, spread our blankets in the shade, play cards, spin yarns, drink mescal and vino, and have a good time generally. From our position, we had a fine view of the country in our front for more than 20 miles, while we were completely hid by the welcome shade trees. Here I have listened to thrilling stories of Napoleon's campaigns related by an old cavalryman of 50 years' service who had served in Italy, Egypt, and in the Russian campaign, and at the age of 70 was still a vigorous soldier in the United States service. Then some son of the Emerald Isle would relate stirring tales of adventure by land and sea under the cross of St. George, in the Indies fighting the Sikhs, or at the Cape Colony against the wild Kaffirs. Or some old dragoon whose soldier-like appearance and re-enlistment stripes told the veteran would tell of bloody encounters with savage beasts and still more savage Indians in the Everglades of Florida and in the Pawnee country. One day, while on picket here, with all the guard listening to the adventures of a comrade, one of the party called our attention to a cloud of dust rising out of the valley towards Paris. The glint of steel amidst the dust told of armed troops, and of course enemies. Our vedette had been so interested in the story that he had neglected his duty, and the column must have been in sight for some time. Corporal Corey was in command and convened a hurried council of war. Our horses were led out of sight. I suggested to our worthy corporal the propriety of sending one man on foot down the hill to the road, keeping well out of sight in the chaparral, to find out what it amounted to, and to come back and report. Rash youth, my plan was adopted, and the grim corporal said that as I had proposed the plan, that I should have the honor of executing it. I would have been glad to have been excused from this duty, but knowing I was in for it, I resolved to discharge it to the best of my ability. I left my saber on my saddle, and advising the corporal to fall back on the infantry pickets in case I fired, as I should only do so in case of discovery, I, carbine in hand, started on my disagreeable mission. Dodging from bush to bush, I reached the road some half a mile ahead of the advancing column, where I crawled under a clump of mesquite and yuccas close to the road. Soon I heard voices mingled with a jingle of spurs and the clatter of sabers, and some 20 horsemen came in sight at a walk. Their leather jackets, high glazed hats proclaimed them as guerrillards or salteadors, and black savage-looking rascals they were. Mounted on small, active mustangs armed with escopettes, pistols, sabers, and murderous-looking lances with their national weapon, the lazo, coiled at their saddle-bow, they presented quite a formidable appearance, but to my mind, overarmed. They were laughing and chatting, all smoking the corn-husk cigarillos, showing conclusively that they were not aware of the close vicinity of some of the hated invaders. I could feel my heart beat as if it would break through my ribs as they passed me, so close that I could have touched some of their horses. I noticed that they had nothing ready for use, most of their arms being lashed to the saddles. The dust they raised in passing almost suffocated me to death, and I was well buried by it. Next came a long pack mule train, and a villainous, no-haired dog smelt around me and commenced to bark. I thought I was gone up shore, but fortunately my tormentors soon trotted on. When all had passed, I started back for the hill and reported what I had seen, estimating their numbers at about 100 armed men, besides the arrieradores, or muleteers. Corporal Corey was more perplexed than ever. He finally concluded to send word to the infantry pickets in camp. We thought that this must be an enemy convoy of provisions collected in this part of the country occupied by us and on its way to their camp. I told Corey that I considered it plainly our duty to attack and hinder their advance until reinforcements reached us, but the corporal was not equal for the emergency, and we done nothing. Nearly an hour passed when we saw a small body of horsemen on the road towards Monclova. On coming up, it proved to be 12 men and Sergeant Jack Miller of the 2nd Dragoons, who, being on a scout, had met our courier, who gave information of the foe, when they came on to see for themselves. I gave Sergeant Miller full particulars in regards to their arms, way of marching, and gratuitously gave my opinion that we could lick them out of their boots. Miller was for attacking them at once, but Corey objected on account of the disparity of numbers and the distance from camp in case of repulse. Miller replied, "Corporal, if you are afraid, you had better return to camp, but I shall beat up their column as soon as possible." We all agreed to stick by the brave sergeant. Corey, after some words with me, in which my words were anything but complimentary, went growling with us. Across the country we went to avoid raising a dust, while the cloud that rolled up in the distance served as a guide to our course. A sharp trot for an hour brought us near their rear guard, when we slung carbines. Jack Miller said, "No firing, men. If 20 dragoons can't whip 100 greasers with the saber, I'll join the doughboys and carry a fence rail all my life." We took the gallop and were soon on them. They were riding in the same careless manner as when I watched them, and we were within 20 yards before they discovered us and their danger. With the charging shout of the dragoons, we rode them down, horse and man. Some tried to get at their weapons, but a few cuts from our sabers stopped all resistance, and the rear guard was ours. To secure their horses and arms, make the prisoners lie down in a pile, was but the work of a minute. Leaving 4 men to guard them with cocked carbines, we dashed on. Overtaking the mule train, we passed it like a whirlwind and found the advance and main force drawn up in line to receive us. But instead of meeting our charge with a countercharge with their lances, they opened fire with their escopettes. We struck them at full speed. They made some resistance with the lance, but our keen blades and powerful horses cut down and overthrew all opposition. Many tried to escape. A few succeeded. The greater part surrendered at discretion. The fruits of our victory summed up as follows. Of the enemy, 6 killed, 13 wounded, 70 prisoners, with horses, equipment, and arms, and 360 pack mules, loaded with beans, corn, mescal, and powder. We had only 1 man and 3 horses slightly wounded. As this neat affair took place on the bank of the Arroyo de los Palmos, Sergeant Miller gave it that name. In the attack on the main body, I had found myself alongside of a black-whiskered chap who lunged at me with his lance. I parried it and gave him a right cut across the face, which added neither to his beauty or health. I gave another a front cut, which took effect on his high sombrero, driving it like an extinguisher down over his face, bringing him to the ground. Collecting our prisoners, we lashed the wounded to the pack saddles, left the dead as they lay, and started back for Monclova in the following order of march. 4 dragoons on the advance, then the pack mules, next the prisoners in a column of 4s, their horses lashed together by lassos, flanked on both sides, and the rear guard, all the dragoons carrying their carbines at an advance. At the reserve, we found a new picket guard set out to relieve us, and Yell's Arkansas Regiment of Cavalry ordered out by General Wool on receiving Corporal Corey's dispatch. On seeing us, the Rackensackers broke ranks and surrounded us yelling and whooping like Indians. Their officers had no control over them, and only our bold front saved our defenseless prisoners from being massacred by these brave, chivalric sons of the South. Finding they could not butcher our charge, they went off at a jump to find other victims. Woe to the cripples and sick women who fell in their way, for their cruelty was only exceeded by their insubordination. After a half-hour's rest, having our wounded seen to, we started again past the infantry pickets, reached the town, and passed through the Grand Plaza, while the garrison went out on dress parade. I felt so satisfied of my share of the achievement that I expected to be promoted to a lance corporal at least. But rather wilted when Corporal Corey came and confined me in the guardhouse, by order of Captain Steen, Corey having reported me for using disrespectful language to him. Thus were all my dreams of ambition and glory vanished in the snug quarters of Company Q. The command was inspected next day by Colonel Harney. When he came to the guardhouse, I, with other prisoners, was paraded on the left of the guard. The colonel asked the prisoners what they were confined for. 2 recruits replied, "For nothing, Colonel." "Nothing? God damn you, nothing. Lieutenant Buford, tie the damn sons of bitches up by the thumbs for 2 hours. The next time you come here, come for something." My turn came next. Knowing my customer, I replied, "For acting the man in the guerrilla fight of yesterday and calling Corporal Corey a damned coward." Harney said, "You did you? Release this desperate fellow before he injures any of you." I was released and sent to my company, but alas, such was the perversity of my cruel fate that the same day Corporal Corey insisted on running his face against my hand, which happened to be closed at the time, and in consequence the stupid fellow's eyes got in the morning, and his face resembled a raw beefsteak, and he blamed me for it. Again, I was quartered in Company Q. I was taken up to Captain Steen's tent. Corey related his story and I mine. Sergeant Miller sent for a dragoon who corroborated mine and gave me great credit for the part I took in the whole affair. I was released. Corey was reduced to the ranks, and Lieutenant Buford, who was detached to drill the Arkansas cavalry, had me detailed for his orderly, and I acted as a fugleman for that regiment in the carbine and saber exercise. During the remainder of my time we lay at Monclova, I had the best of times and I enjoyed my life greatly. It was while we were here in camp that I acquired the name by which I thereafter became known. It happened in this fashion. One day, when I with several comrades were in town on a pass, we visited a confectionery shop to purchase some dulces, or sweet meats. A number of ugly greasers were present engaged in a favorite pastime of theirs, the game of Palancio. A small cake of the brown sugar of the country, in the shape of a sugar loaf, is placed on a block, little end up, and for the sum of 2 claco, about 3 cents, one is allowed to cut at it with a saber. If 2 ounces are sliced off, the sugar, worth 6 cents, is his. If not, he loses. As the cake is as hard as a rock, the percentage is largely in favor of the dealer. We were bantered into trying our hand, and my comrades selected me to represent the U.S. Dragoons in this international affair. I accepted the post of honor on condition of being allowed to use my own saber instead of the clumsy machete of the shop. After some grumbling, the terms were granted, and a wiry-looking greaser took up a heavy cutlass and commenced the game. In a dozen trials, he cut off the allotted amount 7 times. It was now my turn, and my first 3 attempts were decided failures, and our swarthy opponents grinned in delight, and my companions looked blue. But I felt confident. My eye was true, wrist firm, and my saber as keen as a razor. I cut the remaining 9 almost in halves, and we demanded that the little game should continue. In spite of the remonstrance of the astonished shopkeeper, I kept on until 3 dozen of the sugar cakes were ours. The Mexicans cried out, "Que diablo Palancio Juan!" What a devil Palancio John is! My comrades caught at the nickname, and Palancio Jack it was to everybody and everywhere except on the company books.